So to start us off, we're going to talk about where we might be recorded as far as our actions are concerned. And the first thing you need to understand is that everything we do has the potential to be logged or recorded somewhere. Everything. Even if we so much as send a single ping request to the external interface of a DMZ web server, there is probably a log either on the external firewall or on the host itself about the request that was made to it. So our job is not necessarily to completely eliminate or avoid our actions being recorded, but if they're going to be recorded, we want them to be as inconspicuous as possible. If someone really looks hard enough, they're going to be able to backtrace everything that we've done. Now, if we're really worried about this, then there are a lot of options available to us to actually delete items or doctor those items that are relevant to our intrusion without being detected. So you can definitely imagine as soon as we're detected, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to unplug the NIC and cut off all possibility to us having access to that system. Probably directly following that, there will be a forensics investigation, and they will probably be able to track your system down, especially if you didn't have time to put your defenses in place. In addition, they may decide to let you go on about your business, but watch you the entire time. So, neither of which of those options are good for us if we're trying to compromise the system and continue forward with actions. We also have to be aware of log files for various applications. A great example of this is the IIS server log files. It's definitely an overlooked resource by security administrators because a lot of the web-based attacks that you might see performed out in the field are actually logged with predictable results every time in those IIS and Apache log files. So we need to be aware of where those log files exist so that we can clear those under the right circumstances. File access times is another thing that we really need to watch for. This is something that forensics technicians have trained for, is being able to read a timeline based on file access times. And there are tools out there available to hackers that allow them to modify the file access times. Windows Registry is a huge hive full of information about a system. If we change even some of the most minor things in a Windows operating system, we could directly affect the registry. So being aware of what registry entries might be affected by what we're doing is definitely valuable. And some of the things we've talked about so far, such as log files, access times, and registry entries, can all be prepared for in a lab environment, especially during the research and the reconnaissance process. As long as you're taking notes about what systems you're finding, what exploits might be available, it's a perfect opportunity for you to set up and try to set a lab that would emulate your target's environment as best as possible. And the great thing about that is you can set up defenses and monitoring utilities and all of these different defense mechanisms that might exist on that system and try to circumvent those, or at least be aware of how they're going to be affected. Remember, we're not just a super hacker sitting in a dark basement somewhere attacking on the fly. This is a planned and precise attack on a very large and usually well-protected network. We also want to be aware of any hacker tools that we leave behind. Remember, part of our compromise and maintaining access procedures were to potentially load hacker tools to one of the systems we've hacked and use that system as a new attack base. That allows us to migrate our attack base throughout the network and reduces the potential of us getting caught, but we need to be aware of any residual tools or configurations that we might leave behind. Another interesting thing that might be overlooked by a lot of hackers or even security professionals is the performance statistics of operating systems. I'm going to tell you a quick story about this. We were actually going through and looking at some of the degraded performance on some servers in a particular organization we were doing some consulting with. And one of the things that we noticed is that the server's performance would degrade significantly, but we would never see a spike in utilization of resources. So the memory utilization didn't change, the processor utilization didn't change, disk I/O remained the same, but the server dropped to a crawl usually toward the end of business each day. Well, what we ended up realizing is the system had been compromised, a rootkit had been installed, and someone had installed file sharing software on the system and uploaded tons of hacked video games and video files. So every afternoon at 3 or 3:30 p.m., when the kids were getting out of school, they would go home, connect to the internet, and start downloading these files. So around that same time each day, we would see a major degradation in service on those systems. So really, we didn't see anything on the IDS records. The person had done a great job of covering their tracks, except for one thing. They overloaded the server to a point where it caused attention and therefore ultimately revealed that the system had been compromised. You should also be aware of the various types of intrusion detection systems. IDSs can sit nearly anywhere on the network. You've got network-based intrusion detection systems, host-based, and application-based intrusion detection systems. So be aware that there are a lot of options that these security administrators have to help identify these type problems. Proxy servers are another very often overlooked point for actions to be recorded, especially if hackers download files from the internet as part of their compromise process. So it's often a possibility for forensics investigators to go back and track your actions via the proxy server. So make sure you're careful about how you send and receive data. If you're going to use a proxy server, set up a permanent tunnel through the proxy to a remote host that is also compromised. And of course, we can't have a discussion about recorded actions without talking about firewalls. So definitely keep in mind, any kind of firewalls you're trying to evade or potentially compromise, firewalls are usually very rich with logs. So we want to be aware of those and where the locations might reside.